September 11th, 2001, 8:46 a.m. The world didn't end with a bang for everyone. For some, it began with a dial tone and a question that the human brain was never evolved to answer. Most people see 9/11 as a geopolitical pivot, a war of civilizations. But they're wrong. 9/11 was a surgical strike on the collective human nervous system. Why did hundreds of people in the South Tower stay at their desks after the North Tower was hit? Why did they go back to their computers while the sky was literally screaming? Today, we aren't talking about jet fuel or structural steel. We are talking about the architecture of fear. We are dissecting the trauma response of an entire species. This is Psyche of Power. Put on your goggles. The history is messy, but the psychology is cold as ice. Act 1, the Normalcy Bias. The deadliest glitch in the human operating system. When a zebra smells a lion, it runs. It doesn't check its email. It doesn't wait for a supervisor's permission. But humans, we have a bug called Normalcy Bias. When faced with a catastrophe that has no precedent, the brain simply refuses to see it. It looks for the normal in the impossible. After the first plane hit the North Tower, an announcement was made in the South Tower. The building is secure. Please return to your desks. Thousands of people, intelligent, high-functioning professionals, obeyed. They walked back into a death trap, not because they were brave, but because their brains were paralyzed by social proof. Solomon Asch proved this in the 1950s. If everyone else acts like the building isn't burning, your brain will tell you the smoke is just a trick of the light. Logic said wrong. The social lizard brain said don't be the weirdo who leaves early. In the gap between those two thoughts, gravity won. The first cognitive reversal of the day, the authority that told them to stay wasn't just the PA system. It was the internal need for order in the face of absolute chaos. This is called milling in disasters. People don't panic. They talk. They seek consensus. They waste the only currency that matters seconds. For 17 minutes, the South Tower was a laboratory of human hesitation. Then, at 9:03 a.m., the laboratory was destroyed. When the second plane hit, the Normalcy Bias shattered. The world entered a state of cognitive dissonance, so profound it created a global psychic fracture. We all watched it, millions of people, simultaneously, witnessing the impossible. And this brings us to our first deep philosophical pivot. Jean Baudrillard, the French provocateur, called 9/11 the mother of all events. He argued it wasn't a tragedy, it was a symbolic exchange. The system had become so powerful, so global, that it had no external enemies left. So, it had to invite its own destruction. Baudrillard's autoimmune theory, the system, in its perfection, created the vacuum that sucked those planes into the steel. The terrorists didn't kill 3,000 people. They killed the illusion of safety, and the human brain hates a vacuum more than it hates death. The trauma response wasn't just in New York. It was global, and it followed a very specific psychological script. Act 2, the architects of chaos. Let's look at the man in the cave, not as a monster, but as a psychologist. Bin Laden didn't want to conquer America. He didn't have an army. He had something better, an understanding of the spectacle. He used the sublime, a concept from philosopher Edmund Burke. The sublime is an experience of beauty so vast and terrifying that it destroys the observer's sense of self. The visual of the towers falling was perfect, in a horrifying, cinematic sense. It was designed to be watched on repeat, a loop of trauma. Every time that footage played, the amygdala re-triggered. The brain cannot distinguish between a real threat and a high-definition recording of one. This is learned helplessness. If you show a population a threat they cannot fight or flee from, they don't get angry, they get compliant, or they get radical. Bin Laden was a creature of narcissistic injury. He felt the humiliation of the Islamic world as a personal wound. And a narcissist's trauma is never private. It must be shared by everyone. He didn't just want to hurt the U.S. He wanted to force the U.S. to reveal its shadow. Cognitive reversal number 2. The real victory for the hijackers wasn't the collapse of the buildings. It was the overcorrection. Physics tells us that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But psychology tells us that for every trauma, there is a disproportionate reaction. We traded the open society for the security state. We didn't do it because it was logical. We did it to soothe the mortality salience. This brings us to experiment number 2, terror management theory, TMT. Psychologists Greenberg, Pastiesky, and Solomon proved that when humans are reminded of their own death, they become more tribal, more aggressive, more desperate to believe in their own cultural worldview. After 9/11, flag sales went up 500%, not out of patriotism, but out of a biological need to belong to something that survives death. The trauma response of a nation is no different from the trauma response of a child. It is reactive, it is primal, it is blind. We allowed our privacy to be stripped. We allowed wars to be started on hunches, because the brain would rather have a bad plan than no plan. We were trying to kill the feeling of being vulnerable. But you can't shoot a feeling. You can only bury it under more trauma. Act 3. The collective shadow. How the world became a trauma loop. Why are you watching this? Why do we keep going back to those 2 hours in September? It's called traumatic reenactment. The psyche tries to master a past trauma by reliving it. We hope that this time, if we watch the footage enough, the planes will miss. But they never miss. Gravity is a constant, and so is the third-person effect. We believe that other people are influenced by the media, but we are not. We think we are immune to the architecture of fear. We aren't. 9/11 was the first hyperreal event. The image of the event became more important than the event itself. This is the third cognitive reversal. We didn't survive 9/11. We just moved into the ruins of the old world. Every time you take off your shoes at an airport, you are performing a ritual of trauma. It's a psychological scar made visible. The moral injury of the subsequent wars. The guilt of a society that traded its values for a feeling of safety that never arrived. We are living in the post-traumatic stress of the 21st century. 9/11 was the initial sensitizing event. Every political polarization, every conspiracy theory, every fake news panic, they all have roots in the day reality broke. Let's look at the identifiable victim effect. This is experiment number 3. We can weep for one person. We cannot weep for 3,000. The brain's empathy doesn't scale, it crashes. The terrorists knew this. They didn't want empathy. They wanted shock and awe. They wanted to overwhelm the compassion fade. When we are overwhelmed, we stop thinking and start thinking and feel. Thinking is how empires die. History is a meat grinder. Psychology is the handle. 9/11 was the moment the handle was turned by someone who knew exactly how we would break. We talk about never forget. But what is it that we are supposed to remember? The dates, the names, or the fact that our civilization is built on a foundation of perceived stability that can be undone by 19 men with box cutters. The fragility of the social contract. The realization that the adults in the room are just as scared as the children. The trauma response of 9/11 was a demasking. It showed that beneath the skyscrapers and the stock markets, we are still just hairless apes afraid of the dark. And in the dark, we do terrible things to feel safe. Let's go back to that first minute. The wait here announcement. Was it a mistake, a failure of communication? Or was it the bureaucracy of the mind? We have been trained since birth to follow instructions, to trust the system, even when the system is literally melting above our heads. Some people didn't wait. Some people felt the wrongness in their bones. They were the ones who survived, the intuitive outliers. In a trauma state, your gut is faster than your logic. But we are taught to suppress our gut. We are taught to be reasonable. Reason killed more people in the South Tower than the impact did. Let that sink in. The irony of 9/11 is that the more civilized you were, the more likely you were to stay in the building. The more primitive your survival instinct, the faster you ran. We have traded our survival instincts for process, and 9/11 was the ultimate audit of that process. So, where does this leave us? In a world of residual fear. We are the children of the aftermath. We have been conditioned to see threats in every shadow and a ground zero in every city. Trauma doesn't go away. It just changes shape. It becomes part of the landscape. For the next generation, 9/11 is just a chapter, a hardcore history lesson, but they are still breathing the air of the trauma response. The Psyche of Power isn't about the people in the planes or the people in the buildings. It's about you. How does your brain handle the impossible? Do you wait for the announcement? Or do you trust the scream in your blood? We build monuments to the dead, but we rarely build monuments to the psychological shift that happened that day. 9/11 was the day the modern world died of a broken heart. And we are the broken heart trying to beat again. Don't look at the smoke. Look at the mirror. What did you become after the towers fell? History isn't what happened. It's how we survived what happened. The architecture of fear is only as strong as your consent. Remember that. This is Psyche of Power. If you're brave enough to look into the shadow, subscribe. We'll see you in the next autopsy.